Do you want a quick pen sketching style? Something suitable for, say, sitting and having a cup of coffee in the shade and draw a building possibly as complex as this neoclassical building in Sydney. Let me demonstrate for you just such a style and also give you some tips along the way that you can use in your drawing. Look, the first is obvious, but it's don't draw it too large. If time is tight, it's easier to make all the decisions that we need to make in drawing something accurately, regardless of how tight or loose our style is. If we can see everything all at once and if the lines aren't as physically long to draw. So keep our sketch fairly tight in size. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to choose a pen that's an appropriate width, an appropriate thickness for the size of the drawing, the amount of detail that we want to draw, and the effect that we want to create. If we're doing a drawing that, for us, putting a lot of shadow in, say, and creating dark values is going to be important for the effect we want, then using a fine pen means we'll need many more lines to create that dark effect. So a thicker pen may be more suitable. But if we have a lot of detail that we want to include, then a pen that's too thick, that same pen, just may make it difficult for us to create that detail, that effect. We may have lines end up overlapping, joining up with lines and just looking blotchy and heavy. So choosing the appropriate pen, not just to grab the pen we've got, second point. The way I like to start a scene such as this is to choose a section that I can draw accurately and then to, depending on what the subject is, move out from it. And in a fairly box-like, grid almost like structure such as this, I like to go down and across, and I do those first horizontal and vertical sections relatively slower than I will in the rest of the drawing, because I'm establishing widths and heights still relatively quickly. But I know that once I've got these in proportion, I won't have to think about that again, and I can just align down and across relatively quickly. Now, there is a lot of detail with these sections, and I am drawing very gesturally. I want to create the effect of the architecture. I'm not trying to draw it in detail. We're not quite seeing this head on, and so in parts I'm trying to also suggest, such as when I put the shadows behind the windows, that we can actually see some edge, some depth on the left side of the window, but not on the right side of the window, by leaving a slight gap of white against the left side, but taking the darkness of the window right up against the edge of the window on the right hand side, if that makes sense. People often ask me, why don't I do what is more commonly taught and create the larger shapes first, to create the larger box shapes, and then to start with the large shapes and work inwards with the smaller shapes. And it's just that drawing with a pen, directly with a pen, which is the style I want to develop. I don't want to be burdened with drawing in pencil and erasing, and I find that once I start erasing, I just get too perfectionistic and I start to erase everything that's not perfect. And with a pen, I have to commit and I have to push through that mental attitude. And so I find that it's just too hard to try and draw accurate outlines of a building, of, say, the proportions of the box. And if you don't get them completely right, when you add all the detail, it just won't fit in. Or if you make the boxes too large, then you have to put gaps between things that aren't in the original architecture. And I find this, for drawing directly in pen, a far more accurate way to get the overall proportions of the building looking correct. So another thing when we have a quick 20-minute sketch to do, or 10 or 15, is before we start, have a sense of what is it that I'm trying to capture. What's the key thing? Because I'm obviously not going to do a detailed drawing. So what feel do I want? What elements in the composition are important for me? Because I need to be focused on those from the start. And for me in this, it was certainly to capture the feeling of the architecture, to capture the effect of the architecture, but not drawing the exactness of it. And I have a playlist on doing this, on this subject, whether it's a field of flowers, whether it's a crowd of people, whether it's the cobblestones on a road, wherever we have, whether it's leaves on a tree, whenever we have too much detail to draw, or at least to draw in the time that we have, or just to draw full stop, then my strategy, my approach is always to look at what's the overall effect of all this detail and how can I capture the effect? What details can I add that's just enough? And in this with the architecture, it's working out the architectural elements that if I add these, and maybe in one or two spots, I add a little more detail even, that will overall create the effect that this detail covers more of the building than it really does. So I wanted to create the effect of the architectural detail. I wanted to capture the contrast of the tree in front. Trees such as this, especially when they're relatively bare branched, can be a problem. But I think it's always important to establish the space the tree is going to take up first, and then to draw the building behind the tree, rather than to draw the building first and think, oh, look, it's just bare branches, I'll draw them over the top. In my mind, that is very seldom convincing. And so I've just tried to preserve the space there that the tree will take up. And I would have liked to have added more branches to the tree, but there wasn't time. We do have to make compromises in a quick gestural drawing. And as long as the overall amount of detail we draw seems fairly consistent, that's okay. But the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure I added a few people, and I wanted to get the contrast in. I wasn't concerned about getting the detail of the lower section directly in front of me when I took the photo of, I think it was some sort of cafe area that hadn't yet been unpacked for the day's trade. It was relatively early in the morning at this stage. And I wanted to have a few cars just to indicate the slope on the street. And you'll notice that as I come down from the top down, I do get more gestural, there's less detail. And on the ground floor, the floor level with the actual entrance with that little pediment on top, it does become very gestural indeed. And yet it doesn't really matter. There still is the feel of the architecture there, because I've created the effect, the sense of the architecture with the higher up elements. And as can happen when I'm doing the voiceovers to these, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at that horizontal line that goes through the middle of the tree branches, and just wishing I could drop it down 2 or 3 millimeters. The perspective angle is just slightly out, and this is always the burden we have when we draw fast and furious, trying to capture a glimpse, a feel, an effect of something. So this is why when we establish those sort of first fundamental lines, we do still need to slow down a bit and just take care with those, because there was a moment where I could have just taken 5 seconds to just check that angle against what I'd already drawn and not let it slope up too much, or not slope it down too far on the left. Either way would have worked. And even more gestural now with these sections to the right of that first section that I drew, because it's really just there as a bit of a support act. And so now in the last few minutes, I'm just really quickly doing the extremities, the actual lowest part and the highest parts. And as you can see, it does have a bit of a messy effect, and in some ways messier than I would normally draw. But I think pushing ourselves to draw gesturally is a great way to learn many things, and particularly to learn not to be overly precious when we draw. If any of us have troubles with being too overly fussy and too perfectionistic, then this is a great way to overcome that. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, how did you find this? Look, it's not necessarily a straightforward subject, but why not have a go? Why not give yourself 20 minutes or even 30 minutes if you want, and see what you can do in that time. And of course, you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, gesturally or otherwise, fast and furious or slow and carefully, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.